we need to talk about Mexican Fender guitars. I bought a couple of the new Player Series, and I sort of feel like it's a little bit of a return to form for Fender Mexico. And it got me thinking a little bit about what the difference between Mexican and American made guitars are.
This channel is supported by TrueFire. TrueFire is an online library of lessons from some of my favourite players. There's thousands of lessons on there. You can use the promo code JNC40 to get 40% off of any of their courses.
So first of all, you hear some people say, they're just building guitars just over the border, probably with some of the same parts, etc. And if you actually look on Google Maps, this is kind of a little fun thing to do actually, you can see that there's about a 3-hour distance between them, about 180 miles-ish. Basically, it's like California, Tijuana, Ensenada is where the Mexican factory is. It's actually, these now say made in Ensenada instead of made in Mexico. So yeah, in the UK, like a 3-hour journey is a fairly long one. Like from me to London would be sort of 4 hours. But in the US, you guys are definitely used to driving like that far to get from anywhere to anywhere, right? So yeah, they are quite close. If you look at, as well on Google Maps, I can find that the square footage of the Fender factory varies, depending on what you read, but between 177,000 square feet and 250,000 square feet, but pretty large. It's just sat in the middle of like an industrial estate. The Mexican place has been extended for them to make those Fender Acoustasonic things there. And it used to be quite a small place. It opened up in like 93, I think it was, burned down, and then they built it back twice the size. At that point, it was about 40,000 square foot, I think. It seems way bigger than that now. I don't know that there's a huge sort of heritage of building guitars in Mexico. It's not like Korea or Japan or even Indonesia at this point, where there's lots and lots of different brands building out of Mexico. Well, doesn't seem to be. I think maybe like Fender is like that main sort of employer there. Whereas of course, like in Indonesia, Cort owns like loads and loads and loads of factories that PRS, Strandberg, Ibanez, loads of stuff is built from those. I think Schecter as well. But anyway, does it matter particularly where a guitar is built? Well, probably not so much. That factory itself is kind of important. So if you look on forums about hollow body guitars, there's certain factories like the Peerless factory in Korea or the Samick factory that have got like a history of building great guitars. I think Fender Mexico did have, I think, a really good era. So there was an amount of time that Chris Fleming apparently and some custom shop builders were going down to Fender Mexico. And we're talking about the era of like the Baja Telly. At that same time, I think they came out with the Baja Telly and some of the road-worn guitars. And the road-worn guitars, I think, especially the first run, that I had one of those and I've played my buddy Chris's one of those. Those are really, really good guitars, are holding their value incredibly well. So, you know, still you see on eBay, those are going for about £1,000. I got my Fender road-worn Strat for 500, I think, at the time, and sold it probably for a little bit less than that. Those are great guitars that feel amazing in the hands, I think. Nitro bodies, nitro necks, but like a lot of relicking. There is one sort of downside with them, and that is that the wear looks on the fretboards kind of crazy because there's like a big gap between places. There's one bit where there's just a gap where it's like, well, what were they doing there then? And yeah, all quite uniform relicking, all very uniform. But the fact that they're using rosewood on the player model, I think is a good thing. They're rolling the fretboards again, which I think is that again? It might be a first time that they're doing this on the players. And that's kind of a great, comfortable feeling thing in the hands. In terms of, so Elodie, I managed to help her knock this off. In terms of, yeah, you can see it's still quite thick poly paint. I'll get a camera for this. Oh, there you go. It's like quite thick. Instead of the entry-level Mexican stuff, though, I think it might be interesting to try something like I guess what is some of the top-end stuff that they're building down there. So there's this Fender road-worn Mike McCready Strat, which could be an interesting thing to try. I don't know if any of you guys have tried those, but you know, something that's got kind of equivalent specs to one of the American models. As well, I think there was an adjacent Isbell signature that was built down in Fender Mexico. Yeah, frankly, I don't see any reason why you wouldn't necessarily expect the Mexican Fenders to come out, you know, on average being not dissimilar. This one comes out weighing a little bit heavier than I'd like as well, you know, and that's typical. The Fender stuff is going to vary in weight massively as well. I think the reason for that in general around the world is because there was like a big spike in guitar production during COVID, and so presumably now the wood that they're using is newer growth and, you know, less mature. But in general, you know, I'm going to take this to a gig, see what it's like. I guess the thing really is with these, so the wood comes from the same place, apparently, that they make these guitars from. There's subtle differences in, like, the paint that they use. And some of the hardware is apparently interchangeable and goes between models. Some of it, like Fender stuff, is exclusively made in the USA. If you care about things like the hardware being made in the USA and stuff like that. Ultimately, there are parts casters just built in slightly different places. For that reason, I would be thinking, after playing this and after playing a couple of American Vintage Reissue, the Avery stuff, I'd just be chucking the Mexican Fender stuff next to it as well. If I was thinking about, right, I want to buy a new Telly or a new Strat or something, why not? If you're in the shop with them, don't just dismiss the Mexican stuff because you know it's from Mexico. They are all essentially, and someone left a comment to this point, you know, parts casters. They're built to be, you know, somewhat reliably made. All it comes down to really is how heavy was a piece of wood, you know, are there some defects, yes or no? And then the last thing is, like, how good was the person or people who ended up setting it up and doing kind of the key skilled pieces of work, which I guess on a Fender type guitar, it's the fretwork, which is the most, and the nut work that are the most difficult parts to get right, I think. So let me know your thoughts. Have you ever considered a Fender Mexican guitar, or would you? Is there anything about them that specifically puts you off? I've just been looking up the Mike McCready Strat. That does have a slim C neck, so I don't think I'll be buying one of those. But, you know, I'm seriously considering doing some more reviews of these. The other thing to bear in mind is that the Japanese Fenders also have a really good reputation, and that's another thing that maybe we should chuck those in there, or maybe even slightly above the Mexican. But I no longer really have that idea in mind that a Mexican guitar is going to be inferior, because it just might not be.